Alright, I've got a Retina IIIc here, Retina 3 small c. This one's been here before. It was serviced some years ago, but unfortunately it was on a tripod and it blew over in the wind, and as a result it's very unhappy looking. So I've got to look at it now and see what needs to be done, see what's broken and see what I can do about replacing it. The door, front door, looks pretty good. However, this bracket here and this one here are both mutilated. They're both pulled out of shape. And here, this aluminium section here, that's very scratched up looking where this has come out of it. The arm, of course, is pulled out of the aluminium at the same place at the top. More interestingly, there's no button or spring in here for releasing it, which means that this whole panel must have distorted far enough for that to get away, because normally it can't get away from there. It won't pull out far enough to do that. So, I think I'll be in for the arms, top and bottom for the door, probably the aluminium section here, that sliding section, and quite possibly this outer sliding piece here, that housing. That's quite apart from anything else I discover as I go through it. It does cock and fire, which means that the film advance and shutter and things are probably okay. I don't immediately see any problem with the lens there, so that hasn't taken a smack and got damaged. The meter's still functional. So I'll start taking it apart, and it'll have to be taken completely apart to get these sections. So I won't bore you with the early bits. I'll bring you back once I get down that deep. Okay, I've got it stripped down to the pieces we need to remove, and I'm going to start by taking out the screws that hold the front door in, the hinge pins. Top and bottom. I'm checking for the spacer washers, and as is commonly the case, there was a thicker one at the top and a thinner one at the bottom. So let's have a look at this door. Those arms are bent, but the door itself isn't fractured. These are a very thin casting. If they've been dropped or damaged, they'll often split. And of course I don't have limitless spare parts. Sometimes they have to be glued back together. Right, so those arms are shot. We'll need to replace those. I can remove those. I don't think it's worth trying to straighten those up. They're very hard to get them to sit back at the correct angle and sit in the correct plane. Right, so we need to remove this section here. So there's 2 screws at the top, 2 screws at the bottom. I've already removed the focus mount, and so the bellows are not holding anything back in place. Since I've only had this apart a matter of 18 months or 2 years ago, it's not impossible to get the screws out, nor are they unnaturally loose. Right, so we can lift out that section. You can see from the angle those bellows are sitting at that this camera has been sat there with the front in an odd position for some length of time. Right, so I'm just having a quick look at this body. I don't expect to find anything wrong with this. I think that we'll just be able to put everything straight back into that body once I've got my replacement parts found and ready to go. So this piece here, well, we can remove that spring. That spring is only present on some cameras. There was an interesting history with which cameras had that part, which cameras didn't have that part. The whole return spring arrangement for the shutter release changed over time. Just having a look at that piece to make sure it's not bent. No, that looks fine. Right, so we'll push in the one remaining button and see if we can slide this out the back. Oh, it's pretty tight. Okay, one remaining button and one remaining spring. I'm looking at the state of this component, see how mutilated it is. I'll just clean the grease off that so you can see what's going on there. Right, so you can see that this track here has got a big notch in it. That's where one of these arms, where the rivet on one of those arms is thumped into it. It's jumped out of its track and thumped straight into it. And you can see that there's a little bit of scarring here and there. And exactly the same on this surface, except that one's taken an even bigger hit. And that track is quite thumped in there. I'll look through my parts, see if I've got a replacement part exactly the same as that. I'll use it, because otherwise I will have to try and straighten that track out, which I can probably achieve, but it'll never be quite as good as a good one. And this piece, the outer shroud, I can see here that it's bowed out quite a bit at the top. It looks a little bit chewed there where the button would have popped out. The bottom doesn't look quite so bad, but the top section certainly does. That's that should be flat across there. It's got quite a pronounced bow to it. Oh, that one's even worse at the top. So what I'll have to do is replace this section, replace this section, replace those two arms, and I suspect that's all I'm going to need to do. So I'll go and find my parts. Alright, I've got my organ donor parts, and I just need to clean these up and put them in place. This piece is nice and easy, that's not even going to need much cleaning. My two arms, they look quite good. They'll need a clean, but they look like they're in good condition. This piece here, now this is the only one I've got quite like this, because they changed the design of these over time, and I needed one with this little machined recess. This one I see is a broken off screw in here. So my first task is to get that screw out, and then this can be cleaned up. It's in good condition, it's suffered no abuse, and that should be good. And as for the button and its return spring, I know I've got one of those in my parts, so that shouldn't cause me any trouble at all. Alright, I was able to drill out the remains of that screw and run a tap back through there, a 1.4mm tap, to make sure that the threads are all clear and ready for reassembly. So I'm fairly confident now that I can just clean these parts and reassemble the camera. Well, I was able to get that camera back together with those components that I'd chosen from my spares. It was a little bit of an act. The last trick was the door itself at the front, because although it was intact and unbroken, it was quite twisted. So as a result, it didn't shut evenly across here, and it took an awful lot of body English to encourage it to be the shape I wanted it to be. But everything's back together now. The camera's functioning well. Most important as far as this particular repair is concerned, the front opens and shuts smoothly and the focus is smooth. You can just see a tiny scar here on that focus knob, and I think this corner of the door up here caught the brunt of it, judging by the shape of it, but certainly took some wrestling to make that work properly again. So that camera can go back to its owner, and hopefully he'll get more than 18 months out of it this time before something awful happens.